I've been traveling with this film, I've been with a lot of different groups of people. Anthropologists in Brazil, designers in Berlin, architects, politicians, economists, family therapists in Rome. One thing that I have seen is that in each category, in each discipline, that the cup is full, the silo is full. And what is being asked in every one of these ways of knowing is, how do we go further? How do we take it further? How do we know more? How can we expand, extend, grow? The place of growth from here is in integration. And there really isn't a context for that. There isn't rhetoric, there isn't room for that. No one really knows how to get out the top of their silo and start to let go of some of the walls. Their jargon walls, their identity walls, their all sorts of walls. And we've come to a point where it's time to get further, and we don't know how to get there from here. It's amazing what words can do.
It's amazing what words can do. So, instead of language speaking us, why not us speaking language?
Well, what does it mean for us to speak language?
It means I have to deliberately reflect on what I say, and what I say has everything to do with my history of knowing, much of which has, at this point, come from models I found and constructed since becoming involved in the American Society for Cybernetics.
So, the question was, what does it mean to be a trans, inter, or meta-disciplinary subject? This discussion has a long history for, I think, more than 50 years. For the sake of reducing the danger of another Tower of Babel in this field, I would like to turn a bit on terminology. First, there is the discipline. Discipline we can define on the one hand as having cognitive domains, paradigms of research. On the other hand, we can regard discipline as a social organization. Both items, cognitive domains and paradigms of research on the one hand, social organization on the other hand, both items are linked by specific languages, which are generated socially and cognitively. The first item was clarified by Thomas Kuhn, who relied heavily on the Polish physician and philosopher Ludwig Fleck, who did discover this connection more or less in the 1930s. Fleck brought up the dimension of the social of a discipline very clearly. And it remained a topic for science studies. Years ago, 20 years I think, a book came out with the title Academic Tribes and Territories, written by Tony Betcher. I've found a quote: "Each tribe has a name and a territory, settles its own affairs, goes to war with the others, has a distinct language, or at least a distinct dialect, and a variety of ways of demonstrating its apartness from the others." You can't define a discipline better. Many researchers are very satisfied with being an accepted member of a discipline, since there are many rewards: an identity, more or less clear, a scientific task or tasks, a whole environment, including departments, journals, textbooks, and so on, including a specific hierarchy where one has his or her position and his possibility to climb up. For other researchers, disciplines are a kind of intellectual cage. Sometimes research methods and accepted research topics of a discipline are simply too limited. Working together with other disciplines often means a relief and is connected often with deep learning processes, even far from frustration. But what does it mean now, inter-trans-meta-disciplinarity? There are, you may imagine, bookshelves on this topic. I like to remind us on the system scientist Erich Jansch. In 1972, he reported to the UECD on what multi, inter, and transdisciplinary might stand for. Disciplinarity might stand for. He analyzed the problem by the grade of integration of research via languages or language sharing. It seems to be an approach still fruitful. He describes the thing in the following way. Multidisciplinarity is characterized by a common subject of study, two or more than two disciplines. Each discipline remains in its own language. For instance, there's a city with problems of several kinds. There come the social scientists, the geologists, the geographers, and engineers, traffic experts, and they sit around the table and everybody tells you what he found out about a certain small city like Troy. They all do it in their own language and with their own methods. Interdisciplinarity, there are also two or more disciplines, a common subject. The disciplines, in this case, interact and they try to learn from another by understanding the other's language. And the next step for Jansch is transdisciplinarity. Two or more disciplines work together and develop a new language. That's a difference that makes a difference. Jansch did not deal with meta-disciplinarity. Meta is a Greek word, we all know it, for above. In the Middle Ages, theology stood above all the other fields. Philosophy, for instance, then was the ancilla theologiae, the servant of theology. Analytical philosophy in the 1950s or 1960s regarded itself as a meta-discipline of the other disciplines. In exactly such a sense. And science studies do the same nowadays. I myself regarded cybernetics always as a transdiscipline, not as a meta-discipline, for exactly that reason. There should not be a dominant position. Historically speaking, it fulfills all criteria of a transdiscipline. It developed its own specific language. People are coming from different backgrounds in terms of disciplines, and there is a wide field of common interests and applications. The word remaining is the word subject. And I would like to make a last word on the ambiguity of subject. Disciplines have subjects in two senses of the word. They have subjects of study, you also could say objects, and disciplines are formed by subjects, persons like you and me. Thank you for your attention.
It was really kind of strange or serendipitous, some might say, that they decided to use the word paradigm as one of the concepts for this conference, because I had just read a paper by Larry called Circularities in Listening, and he used the term paradigm, and it threw me off. It was asynchronous for me. So I wrote Larry and I said, you know, I'm having a little bit of trouble with this, and that's when I went and found the video from 1993, where there was this incredible conversation that historically I have been involved in, that sort of gave me a direction to take, that we can talk about paradigms, but once they're identified, they become something else, which is intriguing. I'm not sure how that plays out. If I'm developing something, I decide that the only time I shall call it a paradigm is when I recognize that there are things about it that I don't yet see.
So I notice that I need other people to ask me questions for me to discover my paradigms. So could you talk a little bit about the need for conversation for each of us to be able to find what our paradigms are that are speaking us?
There are lots of traces left in the language of those paradigms gone by. It's like feedback. If there's any place on the planet Earth that the term feedback, I think, needs to be used appropriately, it's at a cybernetics conference. It is not, what's your feedback? It is, give me comments so that I might generate feedback. It's a triadic relation, not a dualistic, binary paradigm view of the world. I have found Heinz's triadic relations as, you need all three. It's an interdependent. So if I have two, get stuck in the language with it's this or that, it's he or she, what might be a third? So that I can begin to break away, so I can design things thinking that way and generate things for myself that I would have never gotten to otherwise or had no idea were possible.
Kuhn once said that one of the most frustrating things he had ever experienced was having people run up to him and say, "Oh, Professor Kuhn, thank you very much for telling us about paradigms because now we can avoid them," which to him meant they didn't understand what he was saying at all. Do I hear you saying, okay, we can't avoid them, but we can reflect on old ones, perhaps recursively, and we can, by talking, by having conversations, perhaps recursively, about what we desire, etc., we can fashion new ones, yes?
Yeah,